And welcome to this special event on the topic of aging and spirituality, hosted by Skinner House Books, which is an imprint of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Wonderful to have you here, and also welcome to those of you who are joining us online through our live stream. Happy to have you here with us as well. My name is Marshall Hawkins, and I'm an editor with Skinner House Books. I will introduce our speakers in just a moment. But before I do that, let me begin the way we begin all our gatherings here with a chalice lighting. The words for chalice lighting today are from Orlando Brugnola. Flame, friend of our most ancient ancestors, we kindle you now to make you visible in this time. Yet in truth, you burn always, in the unique worth of each person, in the imagination, in the turning of the heart to sorrow or to joy, in the call to hope, and in the call to justice. Burn bright before us, burn bright within us. Well, we're here this evening to hear from the editor of and three contributors to a new book from Skinner House Books called Landscapes of Aging and Spirituality. This is an anthology of 19 essays written by mostly retired Unitarian Universalist ministers. And in it, they contemplate the experience of getting older and how it intersects with their spiritual lives. They consider growing older as a spiritual path, not one that we choose, but one that chooses us. And so I'll introduce our panelists. The essays were edited and collected by Kathleen Montgomery, who's now retired after serving as the executive vice president of the UUA from 1985 until 2013, serving in that capacity under 4 presidencies. I know you know her. She's on the far end. To her right is Reverend Gary Smith, the Minister Emeritus of First Parish in Concord, Massachusetts, where he served as minister from 1988 until 2011. Prior to that, he served at First Universalist in Bangor, Maine, and UCC congregations prior to that. To his right, Reverend Patricia Tummino is the Minister Emerita at First Unitarian Universalist Society of Middleborough, Mass., where she served for 12 years before retiring in 2010. And in the far end is Reverend Carl Scovel, the Minister Emeritus at King's Chapel in Boston, where he served as minister for 32 years before retiring in 1999. And prior to that, he served our congregation in Sudbury, Mass. So thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. We know it's not for the major stipend you're getting or anything, so we're grateful. Well, the way our program is going to go this evening is the Kay will talk a bit about her vision for the book and why she pulled it together. And then each of our contributors will read an excerpt from their essay. And after that, I'll pose some questions that I had sent them ahead of time to sort of allow them to expand a little further on the topic. And then we'll have a little time for questions and answers from the audience if you have any questions. And then following that, you're invited to join us for a little reception. There's some refreshments, and you'll have a chance to buy the book if you don't have it yet, get it signed if you'd like to do that. So before I turn it over to Kay, I just want to say what a joy it was to work with you on this book. You know, it's not the first book she's done for Skinner House. She was the editor of Day of Promise, in which she went through all of the meditation manuals from 1961 to about 2000 and selected the best ones, in her opinion, and introduced them. That book is still in print today. It's done very well for us. By the way, we now call that series the In Spirit series. And then in 2014, she edited Bless the Imperfect, which is a collection of prayers and poems and prose reflections on congregational life, especially lay leaders in congregation. And that's done very well for us. But with landscapes, this was the first one that she's done since she's retired. And when we first came up with the idea for this book, we didn't have Kay attached to it. We knew we wanted to do a book for seniors and sent out a request for proposals, and we got one from Kay. And I don't think this will surprise many of you to hear that the proposal we got from Kay was, in her typical spare style, much shorter than what we were asking for from proposals. But we knew right away that we would love to have her do it. Not only her name recognition, but just the vast numbers of people that she knows and ability to bring together some of our best writers. And we couldn't be more pleased with the result. The essays are at times poignant, at times playful, at times insightful, at times wistful, and just a wonderful collection. So thanks so much for pulling it together. So without further ado, I'll invite Kay to come up. Well, you could speak from there if you'd like. All right. Yeah.
When I saw the proposal for a book about aging, I was at a point in my life, having been retired just a couple of months, where I had decided that I was going to get really, really rigorous about saying no to anything unless I really, really wanted to do it. So I was practicing saying no. And I saw that proposal, and it was so close to what was on my mind that it felt almost irresistible. And so I was thrilled that they accepted my proposal. One of the things that I want to say at the outset is that I'm always amused when people refer to this as my book, because it is, of course, the book of the 19 people who wrote essays for it. And I was the midwife at best. My contribution was mostly asking, and in a few cases leaning on people to write an essay. One of the wonderful things about the contributions that came in was that none of them were alike. To my surprise, I had kind of agonized over whether I was going to assign particular ways of looking at aging to different people, and I chose not to do that and thought, well, I'll deal with that problem when it happens. But it was a problem that never did happen, because everyone brought their own interior life to it, and just like the rest of life, there's a lot of stuff there, and the stuff showed up in various ways for the various writers, so it was a delight. I have always been extremely interested in the topic of aging. My parents were in their 40s when I was born, and that may or may not have anything to do with it. But for years here at the UUA, for 30 years to be precise, I hassled the religious education folks about needing more material for those people who were aging. Of course, I was not one of them at the outset. And so there was a running joke about anything that was about aging or death I was interested in. One of the things that I remember doing as a young woman was sitting around with my friends and talking about what we wanted to be like when we were old ladies. And I don't remember precisely what I aspired to. I do remember that I wanted to be free to say anything I thought. I remember that I wanted to age gracefully, a phrase that annoys the hell out of me these days. I am about as graceful as I ever was, and no more and no less. And so that aspiration has gone by the boards. I think that the reason that the topic was so important to me is that it felt as though it was, number one, an acknowledgement that you don't live forever, which for most people, and certainly for me, took me a while to really absorb that fact. And it changes things a little bit once you take that in, once you realize that you're not going to be around forever, and so the time you have is the time you have. So what I was looking for, and I say this in the introduction, what I was looking for was not advice. I do not believe in advice unless it's asked for. But what I was looking for was companionship. And that's what I got. So I am so incredibly grateful to the contributors, all of whom just did beautiful jobs, and were quite brave in some cases about writing about their spiritual life and their interior life as they face the inevitability of older and older age, which happens to all of us every day. But when you get older, you actually know that every day. So I'm going to let us get on with the important part, which is hearing from the contributors, but I will conclude just by reading the last paragraph in the introduction that I have. The French have a phrase for that part of the day when it is no longer daylight, but not yet dark. Indeed, it's exactly what's going on right now. Now, Helen, help me here. Le. Thank you. In English, the blue hour. Photographers call it the sweet hour because of the quality of the light. That's how I've come to think of this stage of life. Bittersweet and beautiful because of the quality of the remaining light.
Thanks, Kay. And now we get to hear from the book and the writers, some of the writers from the book. So there's no particular order, but Patricia, you're closest to me, so would you like to go first?
Sure. I began switching my son's names in my 50s. I have always had a hard time keeping track of my calendar. And now that I'm 66, don't ask for any detail about the movie I saw last week. I became concerned enough to bring my poor memory to my doctor's attention. My primary care doctor referred me to a neurologist who arranged for a battery of physical and neurological tests. The doctor said that my memory is well within the range of normal for a woman of your age. His use of the phrase, a woman of your age, meant to be comforting, I think, felt like code. Code for a diminution of what is expected of me because of my age. And my first baby step toward the invisibility that comes with being truly old. I was tempted to hunt down my baby book where it's still extant and enter toward the back, way after baby's first step. The date on which I was first called a woman of your age, a bittersweet accomplishment. If reaching a level of decline where you're called a woman of your age, if that were to be considered an accomplishment, it is a standard that so far, my mother-in-law, who lives with us at home, has failed. At 89, she can tell, and now 90, she can tell what she had for breakfast every day last week. And I'm sure she can easily name everyone she's met since moving in with us 2 years ago. She's also a voracious reader of mysteries and thrillers, who can remember not only which James Patterson novels she's read, but their plots and titles as well. As far as I am concerned, that is savant territory. Meanwhile, I've asked Dr. D to explain what's going on with me. And his answer is basically that age is going on. There are ways in which I have aged more quickly than my mother-in-law. That is humble. And then there's the hearing loss. Most people who know me aren't aware that I'm somewhat hard of hearing, mainly because no one needs to shout at me yet to hear them. Even so, I've developed some simple behaviors to cope with my mild hearing loss. When walking, I try to keep my companions to my left to favor my good ear. And in a restaurant, I try to sit in the middle of the table of friends rather than at the end. Visiting the audiologist is now on my to-do list. One bad habit I haven't yet broken myself of is my tendency to zone out when many voices are talking over one another. This is bad because when casual listening becomes work, I smile and nod, looking as though I'm taking things in, when I'm actually thinking about that to-do list and wondering if I've watered the plants. And sometimes what looks like a memory problem is really a hearing and attention deficit problem. That works for me. I'd rather have a hearing problem than a memory problem, thank you very much. Like our bodies, our brains need stimulation to remain fit. For lovers of travel, this is excellent news. Our brains like us to go to museums and listen to music and meet new people. Taking up a new language or traveling in a foreign country functions as an intellectual push-up. I don't have any imminent plans to go around the world or take a class in Mandarin or applied mathematics, but I have always had what felt like an irrational prejudice that keeping up with technology in the 21st century is essential if I want to stay alert and connected. I was an early Palm Pilot and Kindle adopter. Each of these came with a learning curve. Nowadays, I still always trade up for the latest smartphone. Every group has an individual in it that will whip out their phones at the mere hint of a question. I am the person in my group. I read online that this puts me at risk for developing a new syndrome called the Google effect. This is when the tendency to forget information that can easily be found online. I will happily risk the syndrome. My urge to stay technologically current runs deeper than wanting the latest toy, although wanting toys is somewhat true. For me, the push not to be technologically left behind has something to do with fearing the isolation that comes from an aging brain. Technology is my growth area. It's my foreign language. I refuse to be left behind by technological change without a fight. As I have aged, I have seen person after person drop out of the technological learning curve. Tim, in his late 80s, refused to get an answering machine. Jill won't switch to a cellular phone. Libby stopped at the smartphone. Enzo, my 22-month-old grandson, has no television in his home, but he knows his way around an iPad like an old pro. Not bad for a young man of his age, a true compliment in this case. We have always had a special bond that is evident not just to me, but to everyone who sees us together. When he was a little bit younger, and a month or two would pass before I'd see him again, I always worried that he wouldn't remember who I was. I needn't have worried. He's got a good little memory going for him. I think it's fair to say that he's sharp as a tack. I would like to hitchhike along quietly with Enzo and his generation in the decades to come, not only because I can't get enough of my grandson, but also because I want to position myself in a place where I can see reality continue to morph. And I'm sure he will make a great tour guide. When he comes to visit, he'll know where to find me. I'll be the one out back in the garden, wearing the latest version of the virtual reality headset.
Thank you. Thank you. That's wonderful. So why don't we just move right along to Gary then?
I'm going to come up there if that's okay.
Oh, yeah.
When my mother died, she was 89 years old. She wanted with all her heart to live even longer, but she couldn't. At her memorial service, I said that she was, for a long time, my one and only personal archivist, collecting every sermon I ever wrote, both in print and on tape, a vast library that I said would be worth nothing someday. And how I longed for her to say, "Gary, that was a terrible sermon last Sunday. I just don't think you were up to it." But she never did. I have two brothers, an older brother who lives in West Virginia and a brother who lives on Great Pond in Maine. We are rarely together. But in early October, just this time of year, 3 years before she died, we were all together, my mother, my brothers, and me. All the leaves had not yet turned, the sun still had warmth, the sky was so blue, and the four of us went out in a boat out into the lake, an easy trip with no destination. We followed first this loon and then that one, taking pictures, talking, and laughing. And I was aware then that all kinds of complicated relationships were in that boat on that afternoon. There are complicated relationships in all families, but I was blessed that day, for I was aware of letting it all go for the moment, letting it go, not trying to analyze it, not trying to make a speech or a sermon about it, not being maudlin about it, simply going into that moment and finding myself awash in gratitude. Here I am in a boat in the middle of a lake with my brothers and my mother, with the sun and the water and the wind and the colors and the beauty and the peace. The author Tom Robbins writes, "Perhaps a person gains by accumulating obstacles. Care must be taken, however, to select large obstacles, for only those of sufficient scope and scale have the capacity to lift us out of context and force life to appear in an entirely new and unexpected light. For example, should you litter the floor and tabletops of your room with small objects, well, you step around them, you pick them up, you knock them aside. Should you, on the other hand, encounter in your room a 9,000-pound granite boulder, the surprise it evokes, the extreme steps that must be taken to deal with it, compel you to see with new eyes. Difficulties illuminate existence, Tom Robbins writes, but they must be fresh and of high quality." I am remembering now an event in my early ministry, a moment I had really long forgotten for the sheer 9,000-pound boulder of it all. Here I am in a parking lot near Mount Marcy in the Adirondacks with a youth group from Connecticut. And we have been hiking and camping all the weekend long, and it is Monday of Memorial Day weekend, and we can finally go home, and I can shower, and I can be in my own house, and I can sleep, and I can stop counting teenagers, and my car will not start. And did I mention that it is pouring rain, and my car is in a remote parking lot in the Adirondacks, and it's Memorial Day weekend, and the tow truck people are effectively ignoring me on the other end of the non-cell phone line. Please imagine me there at my 26-year-old immature worst, sitting in a dead car in the rain with 5 overtired teenage people, sitting there with all the other drivers and chaperones and teenagers in their own cars because they won't leave without me. And there comes a tap at my extremely fogged up window and stinky car, and I wind the window down to find one of the chaperones there draped in a dripping bright pink poncho. She says to me, dirty and unshaven, impatient and near tears, she says to me, "Praise the Lord." And she smiles and turns on her heel and returns to her car. There's a stunned silence in my car. I am being asked to pay attention. Her words are really a blessing. The tow truck comes. My car is repaired. We go home. Could it have been that the rain, the dead battery, the grubbiness, the desperation, that horrible pink poncho, the directive, could it have been that all this was one 9,000-pound granite boulder and I still couldn't see it? Difficulties illuminate existence, says Tom Robbins, but they must be fresh and of high quality. Praise the Lord by any other name is an invitation to pay attention. I continue to learn that this life we have been given to lead has twists and turns we can never imagine, has joys and sorrows plenty, has disappointments and surprises, has triumphs and tragedies over which we have no control. What takes our measure, it seems to me, is our own discernment. Shall we notice? Shall we praise? Shall we be grateful? This is what aging has brought me and taught me. In 40 years of ministry, I've had the great privilege and honor of peeking into so many lives and of knowing the 99,000-pound granite boulders that have filled room after room. And I am in awe of the great courage, dexterity, and tenacity so many people brought to their lives when dealing with outrageous obstacles that often block their way. I had a front row seat for all of it. So what have I learned? I have learned to embrace those I love and those who love me, and to speak a silent prayer. I have learned that my own life holds its share of complicated relationships, and like that October day on the lake, I can be attentive, to feel the wind, to hear the laughter, to see the golden leaves over and over and over again. I have learned to be attentive. I have learned to be grateful.
Thank you, Gary. Go ahead, Carl.
You hear? Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank Kay. I was pleased and surprised to be asked to contribute to this volume. And I was also surprised at what I ended up writing. I'm generally known, I think, and see myself as a very upbeat person, and ended up writing what was, even for me, a very sobering reflection. And yet, it is not one that I felt for a moment depressed about. I began with the text, Lord, let me know my end, that what is the measure of my days, let me know how fleeting is my life. The essay begins with a reflection of the blessings and the freedom that I experienced when I retired. I was practically drunk, and I loved it. But as time passed, I discovered a new aspect to the freedom. Now I'm reading from the text. I felt free to feel what our culture would call negative emotions. I am free now to feel regret. I look back on my mistakes, on my sins, not the same thing as mistakes, my blindness to family, friends, parishioners, and to my real self. I no longer excuse myself or beat myself up. These events are part of my life. I hope I never forget them and will always be learning from them. I'm also free to feel sadness, for this is a time of loss. We lose energy, sleep more, take naps. We lose ambition, illness, illusions, hair, teeth, vision, hopes, as well as friends, kin, and colleagues. I am sad at what I never accomplished in my ministry, and sad over the pain in so many people's lives, but especially those whom I know. But I know it's right to be sad at loss and pain. I'd rather be sad than depressed, for sadness frees me from depression. I also feel apprehension at the constant and increasing turning of people to fear, anger, blame, and violence. Or was it always this way? I feel apprehension at my children's and grandchildren's futures, apprehension at the death of loved ones, the sudden silence in the next room, as one writer put it. I feel apprehension at my own dying and diminishment. All these feelings and what prompt them are real. They're part of being alive in elderhood. But one feeling more, which outweighs all those which I've described, and which I feel consonant with the two preceding speakers, is the feeling of gratitude. And then I go on and talk about some of the marvelous things that one experiences and sees at this time of life, which I will skip. Because I then say, all this, however, is going to end someday. The psalmist says, let me know my end. I don't know when or how or where, but it will happen. That someday could be next year, next month, next week, tomorrow, or tonight. Someday I will be living what I am speaking about now. I will be living my departure from this world, the world I so dearly and so deeply love. I do not anticipate a death with dignity. I have seen far too much of death in hospitals and streets and homes. As an orderly, as a young man, I prepared the bodies of the dead for the undertaker. As a minister, I blessed the bodies of my parishioners before the undertaker arrived. As a son, I prayed over my father's body in the morgue. Dignity? Perhaps for a few. Not most of us, I think. But dying is not the point for me, at least not now at this point in my life. My question, strangely, is, and then? As Robert G. Ingersoll said in that magnificent funeral oration of his, every grave asks us whither. How do we answer that question? Do we say heaven, or nowhere, or who knows, or why is it important? Whatever we say, we all face that question. And what enables me then to face this question without gloom or depression or the feeling that I'm being morbid, which I definitely will be someday? What enables me is goodness. I was born in goodness. I have been guided by goodness, though I did not always heed that guidance. I've been nourished by goodness, corrected by goodness, and called by goodness to trust the future which I cannot know. Indeed, I believe that it is good that I do not know what lies ahead, and therefore am forced to trust the goodness which I have already known in this world, and by grace was part of. This goodness does not end. And I believe that we are, all of us, part of this unending goodness. The psalmist says, Lord, make me know my end. But the end is not just the cessation of one's life on earth, but it is the purpose of our life, the end of our life as well, the purpose which God intended in my creation. That intention can never be fulfilled in a single lifetime. But as the Universalists knew, by what also must follow in another lifetime, and in our return to that goodness in which we were born and to which we return. Having said this, does this spare me pain, sadness, regret, apprehension, and an undignified dying? Absolutely not. But the goodness promises me that despite all that, it promises me that as life has meaning, so death has meaning. My death is part of my completion, though I cannot see or know at this time how. All this lies ahead, but meanwhile, on this earth, here there are bills to be paid, floors to be swept, bread to be baked, boys to be walked home from school, books to be read and prayers to be said. In Auden's words, the time being to be redeemed from insignificance. For this and so much more, what could I say but thank you? Postscript. It's unusual to write postscripts to articles, but the above leads me to think about my funeral, a document which I revise with every memorial service which I attend, largely with "thou shalt not," knowing that it will be ignored as so many of my instructions say. It will, however, not be titled "A Celebration of the Life of Carl Scovel." It will be titled "A Service in Praise of God and Thanksgiving on the occasion of Carl Scovel's death. There will be a casket at the service, so the congregation knows that somebody actually died. The congregation will sing the great hymns of mourning, prayer, and praise. They will hear the great texts which deal with the mystery and solemnity of our departure from this world. There will be a prayer of confession, so that the people there have a chance to forgive me for the harm I did them, or confess the harm they think they did to me. There will be prayers, of course, and the commendation of my soul to whatever disposition God has chosen for it. By the end of the service, I hope the people there will know that they have together faced death's great question mark and Christ's promise of the life that lies beyond. More than that, I could not ask for.
Well, I hope those brief snippets from the book whet your appetite to read more. Having read the book several times myself, I feel inspired to go read it again. As I said, I give our panelists some questions in advance to allow them to expound a little bit more on the topic. So I'll let you know what those questions were, and then I'll let us all hear their answers. And they may not address all of them, but whatever sort of most inspires them. But the questions: who is your role model for finding spiritual meaning in aging? How does our culture's perception of aging affect your ability to find spiritual meaning in it? If you could go back and tell your 20-year-old self something, what would it be? And lastly, what do you experience as the best thing about being the age that you are now? So with those questions as the context, I'll invite Patricia, if you'd like to. We'll do about 5 minutes each panelist.
Well, I doubt if I will actually get to all 4 questions, but I've been sort of going back to them in the last week or so and felt that I wasn't really clear about what the spirituality is. As soon as I looked at the page, it became sort of escapist for me. It started to disappear. I'll just take the first one and see where this brings us. Who is your role model for finding spiritual meaning in aging? And when I say things sort of disappear, everybody seems to be a role model of some kind or another. Everyone is someone we can learn from. And so then, well, the question arises, well, then it's spiritually, how are we learning from each other and what are we teaching each other? And I thought to myself, I have in my world 2 people that are grandmothers from whom I have learned much. And so I thought I'd just try to expand on that sentence a little teeny bit. And I can appreciate these 2 wonderful individuals. The first one is my husband's mother. And she lives with us, and she's 90. And I guess what started me off thinking about my mother-in-law is when I realized it's not easy to be 90. And she works really hard at it. And I care for her while she's doing this work. And there are times that I realize that she is showing me something that I need to really think through when I'm looking at it. Because I'll find her annoying in my house, needing me. And I have to sort of deal with my relationship within myself about someone in my home, someone who needs me at the time of life where I feel like the needs my children were getting out of the nest. And I'll just give you one example of the kind of thing that makes me feel I'm a complete idiot. I go shopping, and there are 4 other people in the house, but by the time I'm through, the shopping for Nana has taken twice as long as the shopping for anyone else. And it's not necessarily the amount of things that she has asked for, that she wants me to shop for. It is the specificity of her needs. So she'll say, well, could you get me some Vidal Sassoon hairspray and get the Pro Series and get the gel. I don't like the other spray stuff. I want you to get the gel. And then, and I'd like some Lay's potato chips, but get the ranch flavor. And I'd like you to get the separate bags that all come in one package, because I can't eat them all at once and I don't want them to go stale. So this specificity can make feel like a burr under my saddle. And I realize, though, that she really cares about these things. And she is 90 and she is passionate. And this passion that she is expressing over the shopping list is, I think, quite incredible. And she has lots and lots of energy for life. And it comes out in all sorts of different ways. But I really admire it after I get over the annoyance. But it keeps her going, and it lets us know who she is. And I do think she's really extraordinary and quite amazing. Now, her name, when she was born, was Dominica Castagnola. And she was born and raised Catholic. And her family is an extended Italian family that I have moved into. I'm an interloper, actually. But I guess I'll leave that there, and I'm going to speak for a couple of minutes to my own personal grandmother, Marion Bemis Gilmore. Now, the idea of Dominica Castagnola and Marion Bemis Gilmore, you can hear the Italian, and then you can hear the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, very different sort of thing. This woman was also a very, very strong personality. And the thing I'd like to tell you about is just one episode when I was probably in my mid-teens. And my grandmother, who never gets sick, got sick. And I was asked to spend some time with her and be her companion while she was ill. And she was we had a good time together. I liked my grandmother. And she was showing me a photo album. And there are all these pictures of herself on a cruise with some friends. And she started focusing on this one woman in this picture album and talked with great excitement about this woman. And I realized that she loved this woman. She had met her on a cruise about 10 years before. And ever since meeting her on that cruise, they had gotten together at her house in Kansas or my grandmother's house here in Massachusetts, back and forth. And I just was surprised by that she had made this friend and they had real friendship. And I just want to give you one image of her. She loved stained glass, and she was a gardener. She had enormous gardens out in her yard, so that as a child, I could go out and get lost amid the plants, flowers, and just to give you one more piece. She had a garden that was right out the glass doors, stained glass doors, and they were sort of double facility doors. And she noticed what time it was and said, "Oh, Trish, come with me." And she made me look out the window, or the doorway, excuse me, at this plant. And she said, "There will be a hummingbird here in just a second." And lo and behold, the hummingbird came. You could tell my grandmother said, you can tell time by this hummingbird. And so anyway, what I took away from that day is, I think probably about 13, was that I'm going to have to back up a little bit. My father died when I was very young, and my mother was an alcoholic. So that's a lens through which I understood life. And what threw me off about my grandmother was that I realized that she had, she loved somebody. This was a relationship that was new. And what I didn't know is that you could make friends even as grown-ups. I thought, in my little 13-year-old way, that you got to a certain age and sort of plateaued. And that was because I didn't have good role models in aging. And my grandmother was a great role model, and I realized later, but not too much later, maybe a week, I realized that it was an amazing thing to be able to grow all your life. And somehow at 13, I thought, I'm going to be like her. I'm not going to be like all those other people. I choose my grandmother.
Liz, I have 5 minutes. Will you tell me when my time is up? I read the first question and stayed with it. Who are role models? And I'm aware that I have subconsciously picked up role models all my life. And it began with my grandmother too, my maternal grandmother. It was my only grandparent that I had that I remember. And she just modeled aging cross-generationally. She just had friends of every generation. She came to me in a dream many years ago, long after she had died, and it was her face. It was just a spectacular dream because it was her wonderful face with her white hair, her blue eyes. And she whispers to me, she says, "Gary, it's all magic." And the blue eyes get bigger and bigger, and I woke up so happy. This is the grandmother who lived in her own house until within 6 weeks of when she died at the age of 92. She lived the last 6 weeks with my mother. She wanted to stay in her own house. And she was sick with cancer. And a few days before she died, she asked my mother for the telephone. She wanted to call a friend. So my mother gave her the phone and closed the bedroom door to give her privacy, and she could hear my grandmother talking in there and talking about people and catching up on somebody and doing all that. And so the phone call is over. My mother goes back in and said, what is it? She's catching up on her soap operas. When we lived, I was a minister in the United Church of Christ in Middletown, Connecticut, and we met Nora Hill and Edie Evans, two women who were just remarkable in modeling for me aging. They kept me on the straight and narrow. On Palm Sunday, my very first Palm Sunday at the age of 25, I referred to Jesus riding in on a owl, not a foal. Couldn't wait to get to the pulpit to laugh at me. And I think it was Edie Evans one Sunday who buried her finger right into my chest and said, "Ministers wear white shirts." I never forgot that. Two wonderful women who gave me books from their library when they were breaking up their house and made me beautiful stoles. They were just, as you say, friends across generation. I went to Bangor, Maine, to the Universalist Church there. I cannot remember this woman's name. She had been the librarian in the Bangor Public Library. She was terribly sick at St. Joseph Hospital in Bangor, suffering terribly from bed sores. She didn't sleep well. I had to turn her in this hospital. And the nurses, I go in to see her one day, and the nurses tell you a story. And this woman, they had gone in the night to turn her so she was not on her bed sores. And they said, "Would you please turn over?" And out of the darkness, she said to them, "I will for a quarter." I have to say that over the years, I just keep picking up people. Sibby and Doc Howe in Concord were just such great models for me, and just continuing to look ahead. Now my own brother, 8 years older than I am, and who just had his birthday yesterday. And he turned 76. But on Facebook today, he says, thanks for all the greetings. It made it so much easier to turn 50. So, that's the answer. I'll cede my time to Carl. Okay.
I'm sure that if I sat down and started writing them down, there would be innumerable people whom whose facets of whose lives would have become something I aspire to, whether I do it or not. But the two people that come to my mind are my father and my paternal grandfather. I was named for I grew up overseas. My father was a medical missionary in China. And I was named, my older brother was named for my mother's brother who died in World War II. I was named for my father's father. And even from the interior of China, he managed to get a telegram out which reached my grandfather in Cortland, New York, a week and a half later, telling him that a son had been born and named for him, which was a great joy to him. He was a Presbyterian minister in a church that was both very popular and extremely difficult and personally wearing on him. He was 67 when he was conducting a prayer meeting on Wednesday evening. Presbyterian churches had prayer meetings on Wednesday. And a woman who was in the congregation later told me that we were watching him. The sweat was pouring down his face. He was holding on to the pulpit with both hands. We thought he was simply going to drop any moment. But he didn't. He managed to finish the service, get to the parsonage right next door, and he died 3 hours later. I never asked my grandmother why they didn't retire, but I think I know, and I'll get to that. My father was a medical missionary, worked in China, had an extremely challenging, interesting, difficult, wonderful life. Worked in both China and India, came back, worked in the city in the home office, and when he had to retire, then worked in a rehab hospital. 6 months before he died, he was working full-time. He had a fall in the city, which is where he was working, and he never recovered from that. We drove down, visited him, and he died sitting up waiting for breakfast in the hospital. Now, the reason I think of these two people is I realize that my sense about what I should be doing in retirement was, I've never thought of this until I was just sitting here thinking about, now what was their ethic? Their ethic was, you have been given a life. You have been given a lot of good things, and the purpose of your life is not to work until you're 65 and then play golf or television, go down and see if the Sphinx is really there, or float down some river someplace. Your job is to continue contributing. And what is retirement? Retirement, aging, same issue. The fulfillment of your life lies in what you are able to contribute people, and at the same time, enjoy life and take care of yourself. I mean, there's no point in being an idiot. And I realized that one of the things I wanted to do as an aging person was to be in a position where I could contribute in ways where I thought I could be at least effective. And my experience has been that I found this is a totally win-win situation. Unfortunately, as I intimated earlier, I need more sleep and I take more naps, so that cuts down. But I think those are the two people who just blipped into my mind. So thanks, grandfather, and thanks, Dad.
Thanks, everyone. So now's the time that we can open up the floor to questions from anyone. we have a few more minutes for that. So does anyone have any questions? Tim?
I'd like to ask Kay Montgomery what she would tell her 20-year-old self.
You know, I have very clear memories, visceral memories of myself as 4 and 7 and 28 and 59 and yesterday. 20 is hard for me. And the reason I think is that at 20 I thought I was an adult. And so, you know, here's what I would tell my 20-year-old self. Relax. You know, you don't need to be an adult yet. And indeed, it is what I would tell my 73-year-old self. Yeah, that's the answer. I mean, and I do think one of the things that I didn't respond to this because these are the people who I think have spent a lot of time thinking about this. I'm much more a learner than they are. I mean, one of the things that I am doing in retirement and in age is letting myself be more complex than I was when I was working, and letting myself nap more and being more self-indulgent. I've made a lot of commitments. I mean, it's not that I'm not busy. There are some days when I'm too busy, but relax, you know. So I think that is the lesson that I needed to learn at 4 and 7 and 20 and 47. In fact, they're the same lessons that I'm needing to learn now.
Thank you. Anyone else? Laura?
I'd actually like to hear from everyone on the panel what they would tell their 20-year-old self, or say 35-year-old self, or 50-year-old self. What would you like your younger self to know? And if we have time, what would you like your 90-year-old self to know?
When I was 20, I was in a terrible state. And I had arrived in this country 4 years earlier, and thought and had never really made the transition from living a different world, a world of conflict, wars, different cultures, country I never wanted to leave, and come to a country which I kept shaking my head and saying, this place is crazy. And then, so when I was 20, I was in a state of anxiety, confusion, didn't know where I was going. My parents were back overseas. My siblings were scattered to the four winds. And I think I would tell my 20-year-old self, you know, it's going to be all right. You probably don't believe that, but why don't you write it down on a piece of paper and scotch tape it to the refrigerator. It's going to be all right.
I was 20 in 1967, which was a very turbulent time. And I realized I was very single-focused. I went from high school to college. I so believe in gap years, but didn't have the money to be able to do that. But with all of the things that were happening in politics and in America right then, I wish I had known a broader range of people to be able to just not let the world whiz by, but to really grapple with some of the things that were happening. And I was more reactive than proactive. So I would say to my 20-year-old self, be more proactive, dig down deeper, get off the track once in a while. Not bad for a 36, 7 either.
I really don't know what my 20-year-old self would have had to know. That would have been 1969 for me. And I was at UMass Amherst at that time. And I think I was fairly caught up in the times. And I guess I think maybe slowing down would have been a good thing for me at that age. I was a little rough. I was a little rough on my mother, for example. You know, I think I would have said to my 20-year-old, slow down, breathe. These are good people all around you. But I was one of those angry college kids, as I look back.
We all know that we change in a million different ways over the years, but I'd be interested in knowing from each of you the way in which you've changed that was most surprising to you from the time you were young. That was most surprising, that's operative, or it's most surprising to you.
I can answer that really quickly. If you had ever asked if I would have become a minister in my life, I would have thought that was a joke. And I came under the influence of Reverend Elizabeth Tarbox. Some of you might know who she was. And she really challenged me to the core of my being. And I changed faster than the speed. I did not think people could change on a dime, and yet it felt like I did.
Harlan, my mother, in particular, raised me as a little boy to believe in a God that watched every single thing I did. God knows what you're doing. So if she thought I might be lying to her, she would say, honest to God. So, good. And it wasn't until I got to CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education and Training to be a minister, Kempton Haynes at Vanderbilt University Hospital, my supervisor, I must have said something like, oh, the thought I'm having right now isn't a very good one. And he said, Gary, there are no good thoughts and bad thoughts. They're your thoughts. You can think anything you want to. Really? Blew my head off. I can. So I think that as an introvert, that kind of inner voice, that my father's generation, Walter Mitty, that kind of internal conversation of saying outrageous things, they are inside me. Sometimes they slip out. And I think that is the biggest change of my life.
Well, I'm going to answer this one because it's so interesting, and I'm going to answer the wrong question first. And that is that these days, next week, this might be different, but these days, in this era of my life, I'm much more conscious of the ways that I am the same than I am of the ways that I have changed. And what I think that what that means to me is that I have absorbed all my former selves, and they're still present. And I rather suspect that that's going to, I mean, I don't want to disown the strange and sometimes mistaken and sometimes even bad things that I have done in the past. So I think that for me, this particular, aging goes in stages. It's not like, one day you're middle-aged and the next day you're wise and old. So I think that this particular portion of aging for me is about absorbing my whole self. The way that I have most changed is that I was a caretaker when I was a kid, and I was a caretaker as a mother and spouse, and I was a caretaker as the executive vice president of the UA. I've gotten more selfish.
I think the thing that surprises me, the places where I changed most in my life is my religious journey. If I may use that, I was raised Presbyterian in a missionary culture, which I still very much appreciate and think was, whatever liabilities there were there, was a great experience. I went to college, became a political activist. I suppose theologically I was a humanist or whatever, I don't know. Then became a Quaker went to Quaker meeting for a while. Came to Boston and ended up in a Unitarian church, ended up in Unitarian ministry. And then in retirement, I worshiped very briefly in an Episcopal church, but there was something kind of like vanilla about it that I didn't care much for. And I'm presently, I worship in a Russian Orthodox church, which is, you know, I said to a friend, I don't know where I go from here. And he said, well, I can tell you, he said, you become an Orthodox Jew. But as with Kay, each of these parts is still very much part of me. And I'm still, I sort of balance the Orthodox side of my life with very close, a lot of personal friendships with my colleagues. I teach a Bible study group, 2 groups for UU clergy, and I do counseling for colleagues and seminarians, all UU, I guess, one exception. So I'm still very much part of the UU world, which I couldn't imagine not being part of. It would be cutting off both legs.
Thank you. Well, this is going to bring to a close the formal part of our program, but I invite you to join us for a reception following immediately, right behind you through the doors and the landing. And I will extinguish our chalice with these timeless words from T.S. Eliot. What we call a beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and to know the place for the first time. Thanks for joining us. See you at the reception.